Why was Command so quiet now? The sky over the basin was pale and still. A soft desert morning that hadn't yet decided if it would stay calm or turn cruel. Wind curled off the ridgelines in ghost trails, lifting sand in low spirals like memory leaving the ground. And somewhere in the middle of all that silence, a single black silhouette crawled east. Low, slow, and alone. Jordan didn't speak. Not because she didn't have something to say, but because everything she needed had already been decided. The displays in the Apache's cockpit were dead quiet. No lock-on, no thermal tracks. Every safeguard had been shut down manually. On her request, she hadn't wanted computer assistance. No targeting overlays. No algorithmic firing paths. Just a stick. Just their hands. Just instinct. Her co-pilot, Keith, sat beside her in the tandem cockpit. He'd only looked over once as they'd entered the canyon wash. Not to ask. He already knew. She'd set it flat in mission prep. They need someone to draw fire. I'll take it. And she meant all of it. Even the part she didn't say. That drawing fire was the first step in answering it. Now, their Apache sliced just above the sand. Barely a whisper against the morning wind. The bird was a question. Its flight path deliberate, provocative. A shape meant to be seen daring. The enemy to blink. Keith's voice broke softly through the headset. Eagle 2 holding visual. No thermal ping yet. Command's reply was fast. Tell her to climb if anything lights up. Those tubes will fry the rotors. Jordan heard it she didn't acknowledge. Her eyes stayed on the ridgeline ahead, where sunlight began to rise over jagged stone. Too still. Too clean. It was a kind of quiet you don't trust. The kind that's waiting for a heartbeat to miss. She nudged the collective lower. Just a breath of adjustment. The Apache obeyed like muscle memory. No resistance. No autopilot. She was flying it raw now. Every movement direct from thought to motion. Keith turned his head slightly. Close, he muttered. Jordan didn't flinch. Keep watching the ridge. They'll move. He said nothing else. Above them, the stone sloped into perfect elevation. Enough to hide launcher crews, light enough to reposition fast. Command suspected heat seekers, smart enough to stay cold. Dangerous enough to end them in a second. Everyone knew what happened to the last Apache that crossed this basin. Wreckage was still there, or what little hadn't been eaten by fire. Jordan wasn't flying in memory of it. She was flying ahead of it. The radio from the Ranger team cracked through. Tension in the words. Tight breathing. Still under fire. If we move, they'll cut us. We need her to push up. Force their heads down. She didn't respond. Keith did. Copy. Holding glide. Eyes on elevation. What no one said. They all expected help from the sky. They just didn't expect it to arrive like this. Quiet, manual, and so exposed it felt like madness. But Jordan had asked them to shut off the protections for a reason. She needed the enemy to believe they had her, that she was a ghost without a shell. The flash came like a blink. Left ridge, almost too fast to register. Just a flicker of heat. Then the missile screamed across the sky. A bone-white streak against the canyon wall. It had no lock, no tone. It had been fired manually. Like her, Jordan rolled hard left. The Apache twisted, tail kicking wide, skimming a ravine with less clearance than a parking deck. She didn't hit countermeasures. No flares, no chaff. That would only give the enemy confirmation of her line. Instead, she flew cold. No signal, no signature. Just motion, unpredictable and alive. The missile. Missed by inches, less than a rotor's length. The shockwave rattled the airframe. Dust rained down inside the cockpit. Keith swore, "One shot. Think 3 more." Jordan leveled out without a word. Eyes still forward. Keith glanced at her. Abort run? She didn't blink. Mark the ridge. There were no systems to do that. Targeting was still offline. But Jordan saw it. Every stone, every notch. She mapped it in her head. Locked it down like a sniper memorizing wind flags, commands. Voice rose. Eagle 2, Confirm abort. Pull to safe elevation. Now. Jordan reached forward and killed the feed. Thumb flick. Nothing aggressive. Just quiet control. The only channel she left open was to Keat. We're going full blackout, he said aloud. Watching her closely, Jordan nodded. They think they scared us off. The Apache began to climb, slow and stuttered, mimicking a retreat, nose up. Engine hum fading into the morning air. But it wasn't retreat, it was shape-shifting. They'd already fired once. They'd try again. Jordan wanted them to. She needed them to believe they'd won this round, and just when they thought she was gone, she'd return from above, from nowhere, from silence. The second missile fired right where she'd been 10 seconds before. It screamed into open sky and detonated in the canyon wall with no target in sight. Keat watched the smoke plume. They'll wait, think they got lucky, try to reset. Jordan banked wide around the backside of the ridge, the quiet side, the side no one watched. The Apache moved like a ghost now. No systems, no lights, no sound but the wind through her blades. Not even the Rangers called her anymore, maybe. They thought she was hit. Maybe they were smart enough to trust the silence. Keat leaned back, eyes scanning the earth below. They're gonna think you ran. Jordan didn't answer. She wasn't flying for their thoughts. She was flying for her own, and what she had planned next had nothing to do with noise. What kind of pilot flies into a missile trap? Just to vanish inside it? The Apache curved wide around the backside of the ridge, not soaring, not bolting, just drifting like shadow made real. The sun had begun to rise harder now, sharpening the canyon edges in harsh light. But up here, Jordan kept her aircraft wrapped in motion too smooth to track. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. Every angle of the ridge below had already been memorized. Every launcher's line of fire, every slope their tubes might shift to. While they thought she was retreating, she was mapping. Flying not from instinct, but design. Her version of control didn't look like dominance. It looked like silence. Keat sat beside her in the co-pilot's seat, quiet now. No more questions. Just eyes watching the terrain slide slowly beneath them, broken only by curls of smoke. From where the first missile had struck, wreckage blackened the basin's edge. But Jordan didn't glance back. She already knew what mattered. The gaps. The places where the launch crews would reposition. The shelves they thought she couldn't see. But she saw everything, and more than that. She listened. A crackle broke through their secondary channel, not theirs. It was the enemy. Poor encryption. Sloppy. A man's voice came through, raw with static and overconfidence. Bird is gone. She ran. Another voice laughed behind him. Not stupid enough to try again. Set next tubes, east shelf. Reposition at the deadfall. Jordan didn't blink. Keat caught it too. It boosted the gain. They listened. Every coordinate they dropped. Every casual boast. They were revealing their own undoing. The men below had started to believe the trap had worked, that their job was done. They thought she had turned away and run for cover. They didn't understand who they were dealing with. Jordan brought the Apache higher, hugging the backside of the rock slope. Each adjustment was slow, deliberate, careful not to break profile. The aircraft silhouette stayed small against the morning haze from the ridge below. Even with scopes, she would appear no more than a blur in the sky's shimmer. If they looked at all, but they weren't looking. That was their mistake. Jordan's hand drifted to the fire control switch. She didn't flip it. Not yet. Just let her thumb rest against the edge. She wasn't ready to fire. She was still reading. The voices below kept talking. Another man cursed about wind direction. One barked orders to adjust for a new sight line. Keat leaned in. They're resetting. Shoulder tubes most likely light, quick to fire. She kept watching. They'll be dead in 20, she said. Flat. He looked over. We're still cold? Jordan didn't nod. She didn't have to. There were no lights in the cockpit. No targeting HUD. No computers tracking. The aircraft looked like it was dead. But it wasn't. It was just waiting. And Jordan was listening not to computers, but to rhythm below. The enemy team moved like clockwork. Predictable. Efficient. Too efficient. The kind of efficiency that came from routine. Not fear. They thought this was just another setup. Another chance to catch an incoming bird and score another strike. But they had already been marked. Jordan had read their patterns. She had seen the angle of their shoulders, the way they positioned. Crates. The spacing between men, it wasn't battle anymore. It was choreography. The Apache hovered a beat longer above the bluff. A curve of wind pushed softly against the fuselage. Jordan adjusted without thinking. Her left hand guided the cyclic. In a gentle correction. No sudden movements. No broadcast signals. Just motion. Deliberate and silent below. Two of the men began shifting one launcher toward a ledge near the eastern shelf. One bent over and began setting up tripod legs. Another used a broken piece of metal to check aim alignment. Careless, like someone who assumed no one was watching. Jordan watched everything. Keith whispered, "Still nothing on thermal. They're not lit yet. They don't need to be." She replied. Her voice was calm, disconnected, like this was already over, because in her mind, it was. Every motion they made was a mistake. Every second they stayed exposed, a confirmation. They weren't setting a trap anymore. They were standing in hers. Jordan eased the Apache into a shallower climb, adjusting for current and drift. The aircraft remained nearly motionless in the air. Just a subtle pivot, the kind of drift that felt like wind movement more than intention. It was the kind of position that didn't exist on enemy scanners. The men below finished setting the launcher. One of them stood and stretched. Another took a drink from his canteen. Keith shifted. "We're in range." Jordan didn't answer. She wasn't looking at her instruments. She was watching the delay between footsteps, the slight hesitation in how one man crouched while the other didn't, the way one turned his head when the other didn't patterns. She breathed in slowly, adjusted trim by 1/2 degree, then tapped the radio feed. The enemy voices kept talking. "Tube ready. North slopes ours. Hold fire. Let the next one. Pass, easy kill." Jordan's hand hovered over the manual trigger. She waited for a gesture, not a command, not a broadcast, just one mistake. A man turned his back to reposition gear. The other raised his arm to signal something to a second. Team farther down. Jordan pressed the button. No sound, no lock tone, no guidance overlay. Just a single missile dropping from beneath the Apache's wing, falling silent through the still morning air. The engine didn't light until it cleared the bird. By then, the sound had already been pulled away by the altitude. Keith inhaled. Sharply, "She's gone," Jordan said. The Hellfire missile struck with surgical force. No flourish, no explosion meant for movie screens. Just the sharp crack of metal hitting stone, and the white bloom of a launcher's heart igniting from within. One of the men vanished in flame. Another was thrown against the rocks and never got back up. The rest hadn't even realized she was there yet, and by the time they turned, the second shot was already moving. Why did she fire without locking targets? Because sometimes precision didn't require systems. It just required knowing people, their hesitation, their panic, the half-second gap between instinct and reaction. Jordan didn't need to see their faces to predict what they'd do next. She already knew. And the second missile hit exactly where the first man would dive, not where he stood. That was the difference between computer targeting and human intuition. The ridge erupted, but the Apache didn't lunge forward, didn't strafe, didn't announce itself. It hung in silence, watching, measuring. A smoldering wave of debris rolled down the shelf where two of the teams had repositioned. Metal twisted against stone. A crate flipped over the edge. The third man screamed something unintelligible into the radio. Too late. Jordan pulled back slightly on the cyclic, maintaining altitude, not a full retreat. Just distance. She wasn't done yet. Keith stared at her like he was sitting next to a ghost. How did you— There was no lock, no HUD. Jordan's voice was even, almost disinterested. Didn't need one. He blinked. You guessed. I knew. She didn't elaborate. Not about the firing angles, not about the rhythm, not about the way soldiers move when they think they're invisible. All that lived in her mind, in the space between breath and reaction, are place systems. Couldn't reach, below. The remaining men scrambled. She could see them now. 2 were dragging a shoulder-fired launcher behind cover. 1 was yelling into a handset, probably to their commander, probably screaming about the ghost Apache. That's what the Afghans had called her in Kandahar, the Saya Perinda, the Shadow Bird, because she'd vanish into rock, strike from nowhere, and leave nothing but the wind. Keith's voice cut through. They're calling for backup. I'm catching chatter on another channel. Could be drones inbound. Jordan rotated the Apache 5 degrees to the west. Barely touching the pedals, her eyes scanned the rock ridgeline, looking for movement, for that shimmer of heat off turbine. Fans, but the sky was clean. Let them come, she said. Keith looked at her. You planning to take on drones and ground launchers? Jordan didn't answer. She was watching something. Down on the second ridge, near the fallen deadfall, a figure moved, not military, not like the others, shorter, lighter, civilian clothing. She narrowed her eyes. The figure stumbled forward. Through the haze, one arm was raised, not in surrender, in confusion. Zoom right screen, she said. Keith obeyed. The gun camera locked in, and there it was, a child, a boy, no older than 10. Face blackened with ash, eyes wide, moving toward the wreckage, toward where the second Hellfire had landed. Keith's voice tightened. He was in the blast zone. But Jordan was already adjusting trim, lowering altitude, shifting angle, calculating time to ground, her voice calm. We're going in. You can't land there. Not with launchers still live. I'm not landing. The Apache dipped. Low, too low, below safe hover protocols. Wind tore through the cockpit. Jordan didn't flinch. She moved with it, letting the slope cradle the descent. Below them, the boy had fallen to his knees. Smoke curled around his shoulders. From a distance, he looked like part of the ruin. Then, behind him, a figure emerged. Another man, this one armed, AK slung loose, posture low, eyes scanning. Jordan saw it in half a second. She shifted fire control. Left pylon chain gun. Keith's voice snapped. We don't have a clear idea. I do. The man moved fast, not to help the boy, not to hide, but to reach him first, to use him. Jordan had seen that too many times. Kids turned into shields, into distractions, into bait. The Apache tilted. The M230 chain gun swung down with mechanical grace. No computers, no locks, just Jordan's eye and muscle memory. The trigger pressed, the burst was short. 3 rounds, the man dropped where he stood, legs folded, arm flung wide like he'd been yanked backward. Silence returned. Keith exhaled, like he'd been holding it for a minute straight. How do you know? Jordan hovered just above the basin, rotor wash scattering ash and bits of paper. She looked down at the boy, who now stared up at them, face streaked with soot, unmoving, too shocked to run. I've seen the difference, she said quietly, between someone who runs to save and someone who runs to use. Keith didn't respond. There wasn't much to say. Jordan knew too many faces, too many signs. The weight of what she'd done wasn't something she wore out loud. It just lived in her bones. The boy stumbled back, safe now, confused, but breathing. She brought the Apache higher again, angling west. The sun was harder now, shadows disappearing, and she knew this wouldn't be the last surprise the ridge held. Enemy chatter was back on the net. More voices this time, more coordinated. They'd figured it out. Not who she was. They still thought she was part of a larger flight, but that they were in trouble. One voice came through clear. Secondary launcher lost. Possible lone Apache, priority intercept, cut the pass. Pete turned to her. They're sending intercepts to the canyon mouth, trying to box us in. Jordan stared ahead. They were going to choke the pass, collapse the exits, and then they bring in air. Drones, maybe fast movers, maybe worse, they wanted her pinned. She gave a dry smile. Let them try. And then, for the first time since she took flight that morning, she switched her comms to full power. Her voice cut through the air like a blade. This is Shadow 1. Ridge trap neutralized. Intercepts inbound. If anyone's still listening. She paused just a beat. I might need a second gun. The reply came a moment later, crackling, shaky. Another female voice. We thought you were down. Jordan smirked. Not yet. The channel sparked again. A third voice, male, hoarse. They set a trap for the Apache pilot. Then heard her laugh through the comms. Jordan didn't deny it. She just throttled forward. Who the hell is flying that Apache? It wasn't just confusion. It was panic, buried in the tone, smothered in the headset chatter, slipping through the cracks of enemy transmissions like smoke from a split shell casing. They'd set perfect trap, ambush points on the ridge, hidden launchers, snipers stationed in elevation, timed decoys, and still, the bird hadn't fallen. Worse, it laughed. Jordan didn't mean to, but something about the raw miscalculation of her enemies made her smirk. She wasn't invincible, not by any stretch, but they hadn't counted on what made her dangerous. It wasn't weapons or armor. It was the fact she'd stopped fearing death years ago. Now she just feared failure. Comms are lighting up, Keith said, scanning the signals on his display. 3 different fire teams repositioning. Air intercept confirmed. Could be Mi-35s or an armed drone. They're guessing you're solo now. Jordan kept her eyes forward, adjusting collective, tilting the Apache into a wide banking turn that hugged the canyon wall. The wind carried smoke and dust across the western slopes and from a distance. The sky shimmered like oil in a pan. Let them guess, she said quietly. Her voice wasn't bravado. It was resolve, tired, even. She hadn't expected this today. It was supposed to be recon, low-altitude surveillance near the Afghan-Pakistan border. Checking for heat signatures along an abandoned mule trail. No? Mention of organized militia. No signs of a cross-border cell. Certainly no intelligence about anti-aircraft traps. But they'd known. Not just that a bird was coming. But which bird? Keith narrowed his eyes. You think this was about you? Jordan didn't answer. She didn't have to, because deep inside, she already knew. This wasn't random. Someone had fed information to the wrong hands. Her tail number, her usual route, maybe even her voice signature. A leak, and she was the message. The Apache leveled again, its rotors thundering low over the rocks, down below. Scattered survivors from the ridgeline teams were trying to regroup, but they were disoriented. The plan had failed. Whatever momentum they thought they had, it was shattered now. But Jordan knew better. You don't win these fights by rattling cages. You win by finishing the sentence. She scanned left, eyes tracking the eastern flank of the canyon. A faint heat bloom appeared near the narrow inlet, a small, sleek signature climbing altitude. Drone, she murmured. Keith's head snapped toward the sensor panel, confirming it's armed. Low payload but rapid cycling, which meant it was fast and stupid, a perfect counter to a distracted pilot. They're trying to split your focus, he said. Keep you looking up while they bait you down. Jordan nodded once. We won't give them that luxury. With a sudden jolt, she punched the Apache into a vertical climb. The engine howled. The canyon narrowed behind them, and the gunship's tail almost clipped the ledge as they cut altitude into a gut-turning corkscrew. The G stacked in her chest. Keith grabbed the harness bar. Below them, the drone tried to pivot. It wasn't built for evasive combat. It needed distance, altitude, and clean targeting lanes. Jordan gave it none of those. She swung above it, then dropped, Chain gun down, eyes locked, no radar, no computers, just instinct. 3 rounds. The drone buckled, spiraled, and disappeared behind the rocks in a blossom of smoke. Keith let out a breathless laugh. "You've done this before, Jordan." Didn't respond because in her head, a face was forming. Not Keith, not the drone, not even the soldiers below, but her, Captain Aaliyah Cross. 2 years ago, a woman with steady eyes and a surgeon's calm. They flew together in Syria, 2 Apaches weaving between buildings under blackout rules. On the last night of the Fallujah corridor operation, Jordan made a call, a risky maneuver to draw fire away from a crippled convoy. Cross had followed. Only 1 bird came back, and Jordan never forgave herself for that. So she flew low, took every risk herself, refused backup when she didn't need it. Because failure couldn't happen twice. Keith's voice crackled. "Shadow 1, you've got a signal ping 2 miles west, approaching vector." Jordan frowned. "Friendly?" He hesitated. "Sort of. It's Raven Flight 2 Warthog variant. They were grounded 2 days ago. Might have taken off on your ping." Jordan's comms blinked green. Then a familiar voice, gravelly, amused. "You still hogging the sky, Shadow?" She blinked. It was Dunn, old, stubborn Dunn. The A-10 pilot, who once bet her a bottle of scotch she couldn't drift an Apache sideways through a canyon, and lost. Jordan exhaled softly. "You picked a hell of a time to show," he laughed. "Heard you were dancing with drones and ghosts. Figured you'd get bored if no one joined." A pause then. "Need a wing?" Jordan glanced at Keith, then at the canyon mouth where new hostiles were repositioning. "No," she said. "But you can cover the mouth." There was a click. "Done." Keith shook his head. "You gonna clear the ridge alone?" Jordan looked out again. Not at the sky, but at the ground, the twisted launches, the broken lines, and one small figure, the boy, being pulled to safety by a medic team from a nearby recon post that had picked up her emergency broadcast. She felt her heart slow. This was why she flew. Not for revenge, not even for redemption, but for clarity. Because flying meant choosing. Choosing when to show mercy, and when to remind them what fear felt like. Jordan shifted throttle, tilted nose down, one final sweep. The last 3 enemy fighters had found a cave opening on the far side. A last hideout, maybe another launcher inside. Maybe not, but they'd see her coming. She hovered there, exposed, quiet, steady. They moved. The first one raised a barrel. Jordan didn't. She just keyed comms and let her laugh echo across the canyon. Why wasn't she pulling the trigger? From the cave mouth, the fighters could see the black silhouette of the Apache framed against the amber sky. Rotors steady, gunship nose pointed directly at them. A Hawk still hover, but it didn't move, didn't fire. And for one terrifying second, they wondered if she was toying with them. Jordan's finger rested on the trigger grip. Not pressed, just there. It would take a twitch, less than thought, less than breath. And yet, she held it, because something had shifted inside her. Not doubt, but awareness. If she struck now, they'd vanish in smoke and stone. No trial, no questions, no answers about the leak, no confirmation of what she already feared. They had known too much. Her route, her altitude, her call sign, that didn't come from field scouts or cell phones. That came from inside. "Jordan," Keith whispered, voice thin, watching the thermal readouts. "They're waiting for you to move." She knew, but she was waiting for them. The smallest one, maybe a spotter, maybe not, stepped out of the cave. Barely older than 20, hands shaking, he looked straight at the cockpit glass and raised them, empty palms, no gun. Just eyes wide, chest heaving, like he'd been lied. 2-2, Jordan stared. Then, without firing a single round, she pulled the Apache back, nose up, and lifted into the wind. Keith blinked. "We're leaving?" For now, a beat of silence followed. broken only by the distant rumble of Duns, a 10 strafing the southern ridgeline, a show of force, just close enough to remind them who still owned the sky. But in Jordan's mind, the war was no longer on the ridge. It was in the briefing room, in the chain of command, in the soft click of a secure door, and the eyes of someone who hadn't wanted her back in the air. Not after what happened with Cross, not after the way Jordan kept flying. Anyway, she set course northwest, back toward the fob. Twilight thickened. Clouds rolled in like bruises on the horizon. The Apache's engines hummed lower, her voice muted after the chaos. Keat finally spoke. "What's next?" Jordan exhaled. "We find the leak." The forward operating base looked different when you return alone. No gunships flanking your descent, no chatter on open comms, just dust. And people watching you land like they weren't sure if it was really you. Because by now, the story had spread. An Apache caught in an ambush, trapped, no support, and the pilot laughed through it. It wasn't myth, not yet, but it was echo. As the rotors wound down, Jordan climbed out slowly, helmet in hand, expression unreadable. Her flight suit was soaked, grime layered in the seams. No one spoke at first. Then came the first nod. Then another, and then silence again. She walked past them all, straight into the ops building, past the screens and analysts and junior officers who suddenly stopped breathing when she entered. Colonel March was waiting. He was the kind of man who never blinked unless it cost him something. Weathered, direct, silver bars polished like truth. "You went dark for 47 minutes, he said without turning. "I was busy," Jordan replied. March finally turned. His jaw was tight. 3 outposts picked up emergency flares from your sector. You didn't call them in. They weren't cleared for air coordination. Neither was Raven Flight 2, but they showed up. Jordan didn't flinch. They weren't ordered. They volunteered. March studied her. Something behind his eyes. Not anger, not confusion, but calculation. "You should have been dead, Captain." "I know." He stepped closer. "And yet, you're not." She met his gaze. "Wasn't my time." March narrowed his eyes. "Or maybe they didn't want you dead. Not yet." There it was. She didn't need to say it. He already knew. Jordan set her helmet on the desk. "How long have they known my call sign?" March didn't answer. She leaned in because it wasn't broadcast. It wasn't on the mission docket, and it sure as hell wasn't filed in open systems. So unless some goat herder got access to CENTCOM logs, someone fed them me. A long silence. Then March nodded slowly, almost like it hurt. "You were never supposed to be on that mission." Jordan's eyes flickered. "Excuse me?" Shadow Flight was grounded. He said flatly. "Officially, mission rerouted. But someone overrode the docket and inserted a shadow op window. 0600 slot, right under my nose. Who signed it?" March stared at the wall and said a name. Name Jordan hadn't heard in months. Major Whitaker, her former CO, Cross's former commander, and the one man who said she didn't belong in a cockpit until she understood what loss meant. Jordan stepped back like the name burned her. "You think he knew?" March didn't answer. Didn't have to that night. Jordan stood outside the hangar, under a dark sky thick with wind. Her Apache sat behind her, silent, scarred, but still whole. She lit a match, not for a cigarette, just to watch the flame. It flickered like breath. She thought of Cross again, of that last night, of the promise she made at her funeral. "No one else dies in my shadow." Keat walked up beside her, quiet. "They'll try to bury it." He said, "I know. You gonna let them?" Jordan stared at the flame, then blew it out and said nothing, because sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. How do you bring down someone protected by a system that built them? Jordan couldn't sleep that night. The barracks were quiet, but her mind wasn't. Not after hearing Whitaker's name, not after realizing the trap had been personal. he didn't just want her removed. He wanted her silenced, erased by proxy, in a deniable zone, with enemy hands doing what his pen could not. And what haunted her most was that she hadn't been shocked. That was the weight no one ever talked about. When betrayal stops feeling surprising, when the uniform doesn't always shield you, sometimes it conceals the ones aiming at your back. She sat up before dawn, laced, her boots tight, and stared in the mirror. Her eyes were tired, not broken, but one raw with purpose. She didn't want revenge. She wanted the truth, even if it cost her clearance, her wings, her name. By 0700, she was walking into the intel room. Keith was already there, eyes red, screens glowing. He had stayed up. 3 emails, he said, all scrubbed, 1 voice packet, encrypted but sloppy, logged from a stateside IP, routed through Kandahar's internal relay. Guess who had that access? Jordan didn't blink. Whitaker. Keith nodded. It gets worse. He didn't just route your flight plan. He delayed the QRF response window. 20-minute gap. That's why no one answered when you screamed on comms. Jordan's jaw clenched. He wanted time to confirm the hit. Yeah, but he didn't count on your voice carrying through the static. She thought of that moment again. The laugh, unintentional, instinctive, a survival tick, and yet it had been the one thing they couldn't fake. It told the others she was still alive. I want everything compiled, she said. Logs, reroutes, packet traces. I'll take it to March myself. Keith hesitated. You sure? That's going to burn bridges. I'm not here to make friends, Keith, she said quietly. I'm here to make sure no other pilot gets erased with a keystroke. He didn't argue because he'd flown behind her. He'd watched her hold the line alone, and now he'd follow her again. But bringing it forward wasn't so easy. March listened. He watched the data, scrolled the logs, said all the right words, and then fell silent. For too long, I believe you, he said finally. But it's not enough. Jordan frowned. What do you mean it's not enough? You have implication, not proof of intent, no confession, no whistleblower. If you bring this forward, they'll call it a misrouting error, a procedural gap. You're saying let it go? I'm saying you only get one shot take. It too soon, and the system crushes you before the story has weight. Jordan stared at him, and for the first time, she saw the resignation in his eyes. Not cowardice, realism. He'd seen this before. He'd probably fought it once himself. I'm not waiting, she said. I'm flying again tonight. March looked up. They haven't cleared your Apache. Then clear it. Jordan, I already died once in that cockpit, she said. What else can they take from me now? The next mission was a ghost run, officially listed as Route Check Alpha, unofficially. She was hunting back in the Apache. Jordan felt something settle in her spine, the kind of calm that comes not from safety, but from clarity. She wasn't chasing Whitaker anymore. She was chasing the echo, the gap where conscience should have been. Keith rode behind her, eyes scanning. This isn't just recon, is it? No, she said. It's closure. They swept north, along the old smuggler's trails, past the ridge that had nearly ended her. She didn't look at it this time, didn't need to. The memory was burned into her hands, and then they picked up a trace, encrypted ping, not military, a backdoor signal bouncing off a former FOB, long since decommissioned. Keith narrowed his eyes. That's not normal traffic. Jordan didn't speak, just followed it. They hovered over the ruins of the old post. Nothing but broken fence line and a cracked comms tower. But the signal was real. Then they saw it. A small group below. Not enemy, not local. Men in clean boots. American posture. One of them on a sat phone. Unaware of the gunship above until it was too late. Jordan clicked the mic. You're on. Secure frequency, identify. Panic below. The man dropped the phone, raised a hand, and ran. Infrared shows weapon, Keith said. Scoped M4, Non-standard gear, contractor. Spook, she muttered. Or pretending to be. Jordan circled once. She didn't fire. She didn't need to. They had names, faces, satellite logs, and suddenly, everything Whitaker had tried to bury was exposed to the sun back at base. March read the report in silence. "This is enough," he said. Jordan leaned back, exhausted. "Will it be heard?" March nodded once. Now it has to be. That evening, she sat alone in the hangar again. The Apache cast long shadows. The floor smelled of grease and dust and something older. Ghosts. Maybe a young mechanic walked by. Probably hadn't flown yet. He looked at her differently. Not like a legend. Not like a hero. Like someone who had survived something you weren't supposed to survive. He paused. "Ma'am, is it true?" "What?" "They say?" Jordan raised an eyebrow. "What are they saying?" "That you laughed when they tried to trap you." She smiled faintly. "I didn't mean to." The kid hesitated. "Why'd you do it?" Jordan thought about that. Then she said, "Because they expected fear, and I gave them me instead." What happens when the system turns against its own and loses? The fallout came fast, faster than anyone thought. The debriefs began behind closed doors. Then the internal memos, then silence. Not the kind that meant ignorance. The kind that meant containment. Jordan sat through 3 days of quiet interrogations. Not from enemies, but from men in suits who never saw combat. Men who treated betrayal like a line item on a spreadsheet. Men who asked the same question over and over. "Are you sure it wasn't just a routing error?" She didn't yell, didn't plead, didn't blink. "I'm not sure of much," she'd said. "Except this. People died who didn't have to, and someone made sure I was one of them." The man across the table scribbled something, then looked at her. "But you weren't." She didn't respond, because surviving isn't a rebuttal. It's a burden. Whitaker didn't show up for the hearings. Too convenient, too well-timed. Medical leave. Family emergency. A paper trail so clean it almost sparkled. But the signal logs, the time-stamped emails, the sad phone pings from that shattered FOB, they told another story, a louder one, the kind the system couldn't ignore anymore. By the 4th day, March visited her in the hangar. He stood at the edge of the floor, like always, as if unsure where he belonged in her space. "You were right," he said. She didn't turn around, just kept wiping the dust from the nose of her Apache. "I didn't want to be," she said. No. He paused. "They're pulling his clearance. He's done." She nodded, said nothing. "He won't see charges," March added, more carefully. "But he'll disappear quietly, which is more than he deserves." "Yeah," she said, "but less than the dead deserve." Later that night, she found herself sitting under the same rusted wing by the fence line, helmet beside her, legs stretched out toward the sand. Keith joined her, uninvited but welcome. He didn't say anything for a while, just sat. Then, "What now?" She shrugged. "I keep flying. You're not." "Even going to take leave?" Jordan smiled faintly. "Leave from what?" "I didn't lose." "No," Keith said. "You didn't, but it cost you something." That was the part no one said out loud. What survival takes from you. 2 weeks later, they sent her on a mission with a new crew. Keith stayed behind, grounded, with an injury he hadn't told her about until the night before. "Don't get sentimental," he'd said. "I'm just giving someone else a chance to listen to your bad singing through comms." The new co-pilot was clean-cut, nervous, but respectful. "You really flew solo over Ridge 41? He asked during pre-check. Jordan smirked. "Technically, I had help." He looked confused. "Help?" She tapped the fuselage. "She never gave up on me." Midway through the mission, the storm rolled in, wind howling across the flats, visibility dropping. The kind of night that made even seasoned pilots reconsider their choices. But Jordan didn't flinch. Her voice was calm, her hands steady, her breathing even. The new guy watched her in awe. "How do you stay so still?" She didn't answer right away then, softly. "Because stillness kept me alive." That same night, halfway across the world, a press release went out. Administrative closure. No further action. Systemic review initiated, but buried. In the jargon was something else. A line about procedural reform. Signal relay redundancies. New oversight for flight routing. Keat forwarded it to her with no subject line. Just a single-word message. Echo. She understood. The system had tried to bury her, but her voice had carried past the ridge, past the static, past the silence, an echo they couldn't erase. That evening, when she walked into the mess hall, the room went still, not out of fear, not awe, but respect, and she didn't need a salute or a speech to feel it. Just the quiet nods, the space they made, the knowledge that in a place where power often wore masks. She had flown without one. Outside, the Apache sat under moonlight, quiet, ready, and Jordan placed her hand on its side. Not like a weapon, not like a machine, like a partner, a witness, a truth that never blinked. The trap had failed. The silence had cracked, and somewhere in the wreckage of betrayal and bureaucracy, she had found something purer than victory. She'd found herself again. What do you hold on to when everything else fades? 6 months later, Jordan flew her last combat sortie, not because she was done, but because she'd proven everything she needed to. The mission was clean, brief contact. One extraction. No drama. No near-deaths. No sabotage. Just skill. Focus. Stillness. The kind you earn, not inherit. She hovered over the valley at dusk, blades slicing air as red sun bled across the ridgeline. Her new co-pilot didn't speak much anymore during flight. He'd learned what Keat once had. That silence wasn't empty, it was sacred. They touched down, systems cooling, and she sat for a moment in the cockpit. Helmet in her lap, eyes closed. Not tired, not haunted. Just done. Done proving she could survive what they tried to bury her under. Done needing anyone's permission to exist fully, unapologetically. She didn't turn in her wings with fanfare. No. Big send-off, no retirement banner. Just a quiet signature on a discharge sheet. And a single handshake from March. He said, "Whatever you do next, just don't forget who you are when no one's watching." She replied, "I didn't survive this to disappear." He smiled. "Didn't think you would." She moved out to the high desert, somewhere between nowhere and peace, bought a rusted shipping container, turned it into a workshop, old tools, spare rotors. A busted tail fin she hung over the door like a badge, not a shrine to war, just a reminder. What tried to destroy you didn't. Keat visited sometimes, brought parts, stories, a bottle of something brown and strong. They never talked about Ridge 41. They didn't have to. Instead, they sat under the metal wing she bolted to the side of the structure, listened. The wind sweep through sand, and laughed, a sound neither of them took for granted anymore. "You ever miss it?" Keat asked one evening. Jordan didn't answer for a while then. "I don't miss the system. I miss the silence before the storm, and knowing I could ride straight through it." Letters came sometimes. From women she'd trained, from units who'd heard the story, from pilots trying to find the same stillness she once did in a burning sky. She answered everyone, not with advice, with truth. She told them what no manual teaches. That survival is not just living through something. It's choosing to carry what tried to break you, and flying anyway. One morning, she woke to the sound of a chopper overhead. Civilian model, white paint. Dust kicking up. She didn't duck, didn't freeze. Just stood in the doorway. Hair loose, hand over her eyes, watching it pass. The roar shook her bones, but not her resolve, because fear had long since been traded. For clarity, she kept her helmet. It sat on a shelf next to a photo of her old crew. One missing, one transferred, one lost in the paper shuffle and in black marker. Across the crown of the helmet, The same words Keat had scribbled the night before Ridge 41. "They'll hear you." Years later, a documentary crew came calling, wanted to tell her story, wanted to film the ridge, interview the survivors, uncover what really happened. She declined, not because she was hiding, because some truths don't belong to headlines. They belong to silence and wind and the sound of rotor blades slicing open the dark. One day, a young pilot she'd never met showed up at her door, said nothing at first, just stood there, eyes filled with something raw, then handed Jordan a folded patch. It read, "Echo Squadron." Below it, embroidered, "Still flying, because she did." Jordan held the patch for a moment, then stepped aside and said, "Come in." She never told the whole story, not out loud, but they'd already heard what mattered, because when the trap was set, when the system tried to erase her, she didn't beg, she didn't run, she laughed. And somewhere in that defiant sound, echoing through comms and command and the cold silence of betrayal, she became unforgettable. Sometimes, dignity doesn't speak, it simply flies.